Set to last until at least Thursday when the Senate is back in session, but it could carry on much longer since lawmakers stand fiercely divided. Freedom Caucus member Mark Meadows places blame squarely on the Democrats and says they have not budged on their demands.
There are a number of conservatives who believe that the $5 billion was already a concession. When you look at $25 billion to build a wall, we're already, the president's already come down to $5 billion. We've found a wall. It's on the Democrat side because they're not willing to do anything.
But Democrats are firing back. Senator Jeff Merkley argues President Trump and his Republican colleagues are more interested in a political win than keeping the government funded.
It's not about border security, John. He's sitting on over $1 billion, 94% of what we sent him last year for border security, he hasn't bothered to spend. If you're not going to spend 9 out of 10 dollars on issue, you obviously don't care about it that much. This is politics, not policy.
Doug McKelway has more from Washington. Doug.
Good evening, John. We know from yesterday's meeting between Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Vice President Pence that President Trump made a counteroffer somewhere between the $1.3 billion the Democrats had earlier entertained and the $5 billion the White House had wanted. Sources gave our Mike Emanuel a specific number. The White House lowered their demands to only $2.1 billion for border security, including new fencing, plus $400 million for other security priorities. Still, Schumer's office rejected it, his spokesman issuing a brief statement, quote, "The vice president came in for a discussion and made an offer. Unfortunately, we're still very far apart." Asked today, why won't Democrats give a little on border wall funding? Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley responded this way.
Because we're absolutely willing to fund border security. The American people want us to spend money in a smart way. $5 billion is a lot of money. That's 650,000 children attending Head Start. It's 2 million meals a day a year for seniors. And to spend it on a 4th century strategy rather than on stuff that actually improves border security is something we're just not going to do.
But there is some question whether any number on border security would satisfy Democrats. Republicans believe that it's Nancy Pelosi who's really pulling the strings here. She's running for House Speaker when the new Congress gavels in January, and she cannot afford to lose the votes of a new crop of far-left Democratic freshmen who generally favor open borders.
She's okay with open borders now. She used to be for border security and border walls. She's not so much now, and that's because she's going to the left-wing part of her conference so much, and she needs the votes, and she's really close on the votes, and so she has to deliver on this.
Congress returns on Thursday, but there's increasing skepticism that they can do anything. A more likely scenario is the government shutdown continues into the new year and the new Congress. When Pelosi secures her speakership, negotiating in earnest may begin, because she will then bear some responsibility for the continuing shutdown, along with Schumer and President Trump. John?
A lot of backstories in this one.
Absolutely.
Doug McKelway, thank you. Well, President Trump shows no signs of backing down on his demands for border wall funding. The administration saying they are prepared for the partial shutdown to drag into the new year. And the incoming acting White House chief of staff says the president's been crystal clear on what it will take to get the government fully up and running.
I think it's important that everyone understands the language that everyone is using. The president tweeted out a picture yesterday of a steel fence, the steel slatted fence with the pointed top and so forth. That's what we want to build. In the Democrats' mind, that is not a wall. So they have offered us $1.3 billion to build the barrier that we want, but then they go on TV and say there's no money for a wall. We've already told the Democrats we want to build what the president tweeted out.
Meanwhile, we have learned Deputy Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan will step in to replace outgoing Defense Secretary James Mattis as acting secretary, and that the change will take effect sooner than expected. Ellison Barber, live at the White House with more on that. Ellison.
John, Mattis resigned 4 days ago, but planned to stay at the Pentagon through February. Sources tell Fox News that this early departure was not Mattis's idea. Instead, they say President Trump became annoyed with the coverage Mattis was receiving following his departure, and that annoyance and that frustration led to the expedited departure. Mattis came to the White House on Thursday and delivered his resignation letter to the president that said, in part, quote, "My view views on treating allies with respect and also being clear-eyed about both malign actors and strategic competitors are strongly held and informed by over 4 decades of immersion in these issues. Because you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours on these and other subjects, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position. Sources tell Fox News Mattis wanted to stay until February 28th so he could visit NATO once more, ensure an orderly transition, and testify on Capitol Hill regarding the budget. I've asked the White House for more insight on why Mattis is leaving early. So far, I have not heard back. The Pentagon providing Fox News with this simple statement. The Secretary of Defense serves at the pleasure of the president. The department remains focused on national security. Patrick Shanahan will become the acting defense secretary on January 1st. That, according to the president. The Senate confirmed Shanahan as the deputy secretary of defense in July of 2017. The late Senator John McCain threatened to hold up his nomination after accusing him of ducking questions by initially failing to answer a written question in regards to sending lethal weapons to Ukrainians fighting Russian-backed separatists and his long history working with a top defense contractor. Before becoming the 33rd Deputy Defense Secretary, Shanahan worked at Boeing. He spent more than 3 decades with the company. In April of 2016, he became Boeing's Senior Vice President of Supply Chain and Operations. He has 2 advanced degrees from MIT, a master's in mechanical engineering, and an MBA. Shanahan is said to be a favorite of the president's, but at the Pentagon, he is not viewed as being a very good manager. The president is at the White House, and because of the shutdown staying put for now, the First Lady coming back from Florida to spend Christmas here with him as well. Secret Service dealt with a security incident on the South Lawn a little earlier today. A spokesperson for the agency says that shortly before noon, Secret Service uniformed division officers attempted to speak with a male subject when he crossed over a barrier and into a restricted area. They say the person was immediately apprehended. He was arrested for unlawful entry. So another not boring day here at the White House. John.
And I'm sure there will be many more ahead. Ellison Barber. Ellison, thank you.
You bet.
Well, General Mattis, just one of 2 high-level national security officials to step down as the U.S. prepares to withdraw troops from Syria. U.S. envoy to the anti-ISIS coalition, Brett McGurk, also resigned in protest of that decision. Here's former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta on why he finds the situation so concerning.
If you're in the White House, where you really have to look at the situation and try to do what you can to try to provide a little better stability for the country. There's just too much chaos, too many crises going on. I've been in politics over 50 years in a number of positions and working under 9 presidents. I've never seen a situation like this.
Jillian Turner has more.
The latest member of President Trump's national security team to resign and protest over the decision to withdraw American troops from the ongoing Syrian civil war is Brett McGurk. Foreign policy leaders from President Trump's own party say they don't blame him for leaving.
I would not be surprised if they have not had a meeting. He was leaving in February, but as Mattis just did, one of the greatest patriots I've ever met in my public service, General Mattis. But as Mattis did, he followed suit and left, and he did the right thing.
McGurk's one of a handful of top brass who served in the Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations. And with his departure goes a deep understanding of Iraq and Afghanistan and the terrorist organizations that populate the region. President Obama's national security advisor says it's a huge loss. Tweeting yesterday, the fact that you say you don't know Brett McGurk speaks volumes about your commitment to fighting ISIS at Real Donald Trump. Why don't you know the man who's done more than any civilian to degrade ISIS? I can assure you, Barack Obama knows him well. President Trump's brand new chief of staff says McGurk never briefed the president.
The president says in a tweet he didn't know Brett McGurk. How is it possible that the president doesn't know the envoy who has been representing the U.S. to the coalition for the last 2 years?
Well, I think that's easy because the president's dealing with the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense. I mean, despite what people think, the White House is not Grand Central Station.
Pentagon sources tell Fox News to expect more and continuous resignations in response to President Trump's decision to withdraw American troops from Syria. John?
Jillian Turner. Thanks, Jillian. New details on the man who opened fire on a Christmas market in France earlier this month. A French judicial official says Sharif Chakat pledged allegiance to ISIS before the shooting. Investigators say they found a video of his pledge on a USB device. The gunman died in a shootout with police days after the Strasbourg attack that killed 5 people. A deadly tsunami hitting Indonesia with no warning. Waves ripping structures apart in seconds, killing at least 200 people and injuring hundreds more. Scientists say an undersea volcanic eruption likely caused it. President Trump tweeting on the catastrophe earlier this afternoon. Unthinkable devastation from the tsunami disaster in Indonesia. More than 200 dead and nearly 1,000 injured or unaccounted for. We are praying for recovery and healing. America is with you. Jeff Paul is following the story from Los Angeles. Jeff.
John, the number of dead likely to rise with still many missing and rescue crews unable to physically get to all the devastated areas to search. The waves in some cases were as high as 65 feet as they crashed onto the island that was full of people celebrating for the holiday weekend.
I was sleeping. It hit us at the same time when my son closed the hotel door. I didn't know what was hitting me. My hand is so hurt. I also got some minor wounds, but my husband suffered a broken leg.
That's just one of the more than 800 survivors who were hurt in the tsunami that hit last night. The massive waves crashing ashore, carrying away hotels, hundreds of homes, and crowds of people, including many who were on the beach for a concert. Scientists say the tsunami was likely caused by undersea landslides or by those happening above sea level on the outside slope of the Anuak Krakatau volcano after it erupted. Geologists believe the volcano first erupted, then less than a half an hour later, there was a tsunami, giving anyone on the island not much of a chance to get out of harm's way.
There was very little warning. It would have only taken about 10 minutes for the tsunami to hit the coast to the west. It took about an hour to hit it to the east, but even so, there's still very little time to get a warning out. And there are no buoys in this particular area for early warnings.
The Indonesian military is said to be on the ground joining search teams as they continue looking for survivors. But, John, the death toll is expected to only get worse.
And it's hit them again. Another sad story for Indonesia. Jeff Paul, thank you. Alarm bells ringing in the Middle East after President Trump announces a withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. Now, one U.S. ally says it will step up its fight in the region. That's ahead. And from the mass shooting at the Capitol Hill Gazette to the murder of a Washington Post columnist, it was not a safe year for journalists. More on the troubling worldwide trend.
I think this is a really disturbing signal that journalists have become bigger targets, that journalists are in the crosshairs.
I think by abruptly withdrawing from Syria, President Trump is handing a great big Christmas gift to Vladimir Putin of Russia and to the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran.
We've been there 17 years. We've been in the Middle East most of that time. It's not precipitous. The president promised when we went into Syria, our goal was to wipe out ISIS. We took 99% of the land. They're on the run. Can the people who live there not do anything?
Lawmakers both for and against President Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria sounding off this morning. The president expects it to be a slow and highly coordinated effort, but his sudden decision leaves other nations in the region scrambling to figure out what they will do next. Trey Yingst has more from our Jerusalem bureau.
While the Trump administration is pulling U.S. troops out of Syria, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said today that Israel may increase military action against Iranian factions within the country. Netanyahu speaking Sunday at the Israeli government cabinet meeting in Jerusalem, adding that the U.S. withdrawal will not affect Israel's efforts to counter Iranian aggression. Israel routinely strikes Iranian targets in Syria and is currently conducting an anti-tunnel operation against the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran. The Prime Minister's comments come as Turkish troops are gathering on the Syrian border in preparation for a ground operation against Kurdish fighters in northern Syria. The Kurds supported the United States over the past 4 years in the fight against ISIS. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan reportedly promised President Trump last week that he would finish off battling ISIS, clearing the way for the Trump administration announcement of the U.S. troop withdrawal. Despite Turkish support of the withdrawal to allow for an attack against Kurdish forces, U.S. allies such as France saw the announcement as a betrayal of the U.S.-backed fighters.
We owe to those who fought on the ground against the terrorists, those on the ground who took up arms to fight terrorists, who incited attacks against Paris and elsewhere. Those were the SDF, the Kurds in Syria.
The Trump administration's decision to withdraw all U.S. troops from Syria has not only faced external rebuke, but also internal, with Secretary of Defense James Mattis and U.S. envoy against ISIS Brett McGurk resigning over the matter. John?
Trey Yingst reporting from Jerusalem. Thank you, Trey. 9 Russian construction workers dead after a fire trapped them inside a mine. It happened yesterday at a site in the Ural Mountains. The crews were doing maintenance work when flames broke out and cut off their exit. Rescue teams reached their remains today. No word on the cause of the fire, but a criminal investigation is now underway. One of the last known Jewish fighters from the 1943 Warsaw Ghetto uprising against the Nazis has died. Simcha Rotem was 84 years old. He took part in the single greatest act of Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. Rotem helped save survivors of the uprising by smuggling them out of the burning ghetto through sewage tunnels. The Jewish fighters fought nearly a month and managed to kill 16 Nazis and wound nearly 100. The uprising inspired other resistance campaigns by Jews and non-Jews alike. 2018 has been a deadly year for journalists, from a gunman storming a Maryland newsroom to the savage murder of a dissident Saudi columnist in Turkey. Rick Leventhal has more.
The killing of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi has been widely publicized, but he's just one of nearly 36 journalists murdered in retaliation for their work in 2018, nearly doubling last year's total, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists.
I think this is a really disturbing signal that journalists have become bigger targets, that journalists are in the crosshairs.
Khashoggi, a native of Saudi Arabia, was living in the U.S. and working for the Washington Post and had been highly critical of the Saudi government. He'd gone to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to finalize his divorce so he could remarry, but was brutally strangled and dismembered, allegedly on orders from Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's denied involvement. The CPJ's annual report found more than 50 journalists were killed worldwide this year. The most deadly assignment, Afghanistan, where 13 members of the press lost their lives, 9 of them in back-to-back suicide bombings on April 30th. The U.S. was one of the top 5 deadliest countries for the first time in 2018, according to the group Reporters Without Borders, because of the shooting this summer at the Capital Gazette newspaper in Annapolis, Maryland, where 4 journalists and a sales associate were killed. 2 other Americans died covering extreme weather. The CPJ says targeted killings are up 88%, and roughly 250 reporters have been jailed each of the past 3 years, simply for doing their job.
Journalism is often equated with terrorism. So many of the journalists behind bars are imprisoned on anti-state charges, such as supporting a terrorist group or providing support to terrorism. And oftentimes that's because they're simply reporting about terrorist groups or on subjects that the government doesn't appreciate.
The CPJ found another disturbing trend. 90% of journalists' deaths go unpunished, which it says threatens the very foundation of a free press. In New York, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
Devastation in Indonesia after a tsunami hits without warning, killing more than 200 people. What scientists say triggered it. Plus, the battle over a border wall rages on in Washington. Lawmakers trading new proposals in hopes of getting the government fully back and open, but both sides appear unwilling to budge. So just how long could this last?
I don't care what we call it, neither does the president. The president's actually talking about different, but what we want is barriers. I think we're just about there. If we would both just recognize this is not about politics, it's about the security of our country.
I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report, approaching the bottom of the hour. And if you're just joining us, the partial government shutdown will last at least until Thursday, when senators return to Capitol Hill. In the meantime, lawmakers continue to negotiate, trading proposals in hopes of reaching a deal. But still, Congress is unable to agree, and incoming acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney says the partial shutdown could stretch into the new year.
We had given an offer, a counteroffer to Mr. Schumer late yesterday afternoon, and immediately, I think thereafter, the Senate went into recess until at least Thursday. That doesn't mean it will be before Thursday till we hear something back, but I don't think things are going to move very quickly here for the next couple of days. I think that is, it's very possible that this shutdown will go beyond the 28th and into the new Congress.
Well, let's bring in White House reporter for the Washington Examiner, Stephen Nelson. Stephen, the president, his position going into this partial shutdown was that he wanted $5 billion for the wall. Does he get it?
It seems unlikely that he walks away from this showdown over the shutdown with $5 billion for the wall. Of course, the Democrats are emboldened by two things, really. They are emboldened by President Trump preemptively claiming credit for the shutdown, and also by the fact that Democrats are retaking the House of Representatives on January 3rd, making Wall all that more difficult to fund. Perhaps, though, by losing, President Trump does gain something. His base, which was very excited about a wall, was really talking as though they were ready to rebel at him seemingly capitulating on the wall. So by digging in here, he has firmed up his base and done a little bit to mute criticism there.
Yeah, Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz is one of those who's urging the president to stand firm. He says that the president has learned some from previous events in office. Listen to this.
He said he would not sign a bad deal. He deeply regrets having signed, I think, a very bad spending cap deal before. And I think that he's informed by that regret as he's making these decisions now. And he is not going to give in without funding for border security.
So if the president sticks to his guns and demands some kind of funding, what is he likely to get from the Democrats?
Well, legislation is the art of compromise. Of course, he says $5 billion. Who knows what Democrats would come up as some sort of face-saving gesture. If we recall the last significant shutdown last January, well, this January actually, it ended with the promise of Senate votes on immigration policy. Democrats gave up their objections, and there were going to be votes on DACA. The policy actually didn't end up changing, but that gave a bit of an out. We'll have to wait and see what is going to come here. Both sides, of course, have dug in their heels, though, and there's not a lot of optimism about this impasse being resolved quickly.
It's not just Democrats, though, who are criticizing him. Outgoing Republican Senator Bob Corker also had this to say about the president's position. Listen.
By the way, most Republicans want to deal with the Dreamers issue. So we had $25 billion that could have been spent on border security. Now the government is shut down over what ultimately is going to be $2 billion. This is a made-up fight, so the president can look like he's fighting.
He seems to suggest that the president is going to come out of this with maybe $2 billion toward the wall.
Well, it remains to be seen what he comes out of this with, but there certainly are risks for President Trump here. The workers who are deemed essential and are working currently, they had their scheduled leave canceled, and these are people working for agencies that are presumed to be more supportive of the president, ICE and Border Patrol. There certainly is a potential for sad stories coming out there. And of course, as you mentioned, there are Republican lawmakers who weren't that big of fans of President Trump to begin with, who are criticizing him over this. So there certainly are risks for President Trump as this continues.
Well, and as the Democrats take over the House in early January, it would seem that they have very little motivation to negotiate until presumably Nancy Pelosi becomes Speaker.
Sure, but no one expects a shutdown to last 2 years, and being in charge of the House of Representatives brings a bit of responsibility to negotiate with the president. So this is going to end. It's just a question of when and how.
But it could go into the new year.
That seems to be what everyone is expecting.
And in terms of the Senate, the Republicans are going to have bigger numbers in the Senate, so it's kind of a mixed bag. Democrats take over the House, Republicans have bigger numbers in the Senate coming up. Which is of greater benefit to the president and his negotiating position?
Well, in the Senate, the number that really matters is 60, which is enough to move to a vote. Republicans won't have quite 60 votes. So certainly the change in the House control is the more significant here. Democrats are currently blocking this in the Senate, and they would continue to do so. And, of course, they will have the House majority in the new year.
Stephen Nelson is White House reporter at the Washington Examiner. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Well, there's a glimmer of good news for any government employees not getting paid at the moment. During the partial shutdown, celebrity chef Jose Andres is offering federal workers a free sandwich every day. Andres making the announcement on Twitter late Friday, saying, quote, All my beautiful, hardworking people of the federal government, come to any of my places with your families at the bar between 2 and 5 p.m. for a free sandwich every day until back to work.
There's very little time to do much about it. Normally, you have an earthquake, there's a warning because you've got an earthquake. In this case, there was no earthquake as such. And so there wasn't even the chance for people to realize an earthquake would lead to a tsunami. So there was very little that could have been done in this case, and it's just a tragic fact of nature.
That fact of nature killing at least 220 people when a tsunami slammed into Indonesia without warning Saturday. But unlike the September earthquake and tsunami that killed thousands, this one was caused by volcanic activity. Jackie Heinrich explains from New York.
Scientists believe an underwater landslide triggered a huge tidal surge and formed the tsunami, and they're pointing to one volcano as the cause. Mount Anak Krakatau is considered the child of legendary volcano Krakatoa. It erupted around 9 o'clock last night. Anak Krakatau is a small volcanic island that formed about 50 years after Krakatoa erupted in 1883, killing 36,000 people with 100-foot-high waves. According to Indonesia's geological agency, Anak Krakatau had been active for the last few days. An eruption just before 4 o'clock yesterday sent plumes of ash into the air for around 13 minutes. The full moon may have also created high tides, making the impact of the tsunami more severe.
These things will happen from time to time, and they're very hard to predict. And you'll get almost no warning because the volcano is very close to the coast, and so you have a few minutes warning, maybe at most. Won't help very much.
Scientists say volcano-triggered tsunamis are more rare and have less warning than ones caused by earthquakes, but both involve landslides that suddenly displace water. Landslides that fall into shallow water can cause mega tsunamis. The worst one happened in 1958 in Alaska's Lituya Bay. Waves were 1,700 feet high. Indonesia is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, sitting on the Pacific Ring of Fire where tectonic plates collide. In September, an earthquake and tsunami off the coast of the island of Sulawesi killed more than 2,000 people and injured 10,000 more. And in 2004, a tsunami off the coast of Sumatra in western Indonesia killed 220,000 people. Anak Krakatau is one of more than 100 active volcanoes in the area. People have been told to avoid the coast in case there's another tsunami. John.
Jackie, thank you. There is a nationwide push underway to upgrade emergency communications systems in the U.S. as 911 centers begin to add text and video as a way to get help. Emily Akata has the story.
This is a 911 call in Mexico. The man, shot in the hand, used live video chat to communicate with emergency officials. Similar technology touched down in the U.S. earlier this year, responding to a wake of criticism over aging 911 systems.
Right now, the communications habits and preferences of America are changing so quickly away from voice calls. And it's really crucial that 911 keeps up with those advances, or else it risks becoming irrelevant.
Camry Copeland was one of the first 911 professionals in the U.S. to use the video function.
Can I just see both vehicles?
Yeah. Here's how it works. Once an emergency call is placed in Fayette County, Georgia, communications officers like Copeland's can send a link to the user's phone, which then enables live streaming or texting. Officials say these options help provide more information when callers can't talk for medical or safety reasons. But some question if there's such a thing as providing too much information.
One of our biggest concerns is the mental health of our 911 professionals.
Melissa Altiero works north of Atlanta, where residents can text 911 directly.
We experience trauma just talking to somebody on the phone through their worst crisis. But once we start seeing graphic images, we're very concerned about the trauma that that's going to have on the 911 professionals.
Though Altiero admits in today's age of multimedia, this technology is the future of 911. That is, if funding is available. Less than a third of 911 centers across the country offer a texting option and even fewer video, but that could change should Congress approve a bill aimed at accelerating the rollout of such technology with additional federal grants. John?
Emily Akeda reporting. Thanks, Emily. Well, after multiple reports of drone sightings shut down Britain's second largest airport for 2 days, now investigators say there is a chance it was never drones at all. So then what happened? Plus, a drought out west taking a toll on horses. What one organization is doing to try to help.
We had mayors that were